asset owners, whether as a family or as a foundation or as an endowment, really there's only like two questions. And I say that this is at the beginning and the end of the day because I really think that when you start life, you kind of live it to the fullest, and everything that you have, you're playing to the max, right? I mean, like when you're 5 and you're running around and you get that lollipop, it's great, right? It's so great. And there's an economic value to the lollipop that costs a nickel, and there's the social value of the immediacy of the pleasure that you get by eating that lollipop, and you don't differentiate, right? You don't say, well, is it the economic value that generates the social impact, or is it the social value that really has economic implications, right? You don't think that way. You think about, in the totality, are you and your assets really maximizing the full value potential that you have? And when you die, right, and you're looking at it coming down like a week from now or a month from now or whatever date is out there that you see looming, right, you're not going to be sitting there saying, wow, I've got so much more money than the person next to me. I can guarantee that that is not going to be the measure of value of your having lived a life. Right? And the conversation that we need to have is to focus more on what's the full legacy and value that was created through that trajectory of having lived. That's the issue. And it's the issue when I do a lot of work with families, ultra high net worth families who are talking about, you know, we've got this huge pile of cash and we don't want to choke the kids, right, by giving it to them. So what do you do? Like, how do you manage this process? Because it's just not about the money. It's about the value that you create. And so as asset owners, the issue really becomes, are all of our assets really strategically positioned to achieve the goals and the purpose and the mission that we're trying to fulfill by virtue of having been here? And that's fundamentally what the conversation really becomes about. And the tricky thing is that we actually live in this bifurcated world that asks us to believe that it's an either-or proposition. When you think about your career, certainly in my case, I had to make a decision. Was I going to go into the nonprofit sector or the for-profit space? Do you give money away or do you invest? And so what we've created is really a set of institutions and practices and instruments that are all framed around this idea of bifurcated value. And I think the philanthropic business model is a great example of this. Because what we do is, we basically say, we're going to take a pile of cash, and we're going to put it over here, and we're going to manage that money to do some social good. And so as a donor, I get a tax consideration for creating this institution of either private family foundation or a donor advised fund or whatever it is, and we're going to manage that money, and then we're going to take a piece of that. We're going to take a payout, and in the States it's about 5%. Here I understand it's something less than that, like 3.5 or so. And we're going to use that money to achieve good. Okay? So here's the business proposition that I'm asking you to embrace. I have the solution to poverty. For every dollar you give me for my business model, I'm going to take 95%, and at best, that money will be neutral to the execution of my business strategy. And I'm going to take a nickel, and I'm going to use that to execute my business strategy. Okay? So what entrepreneur would you want to invest in who took 95% of the funds raised and put it on the shelf? But we do that every single day in philanthropy, and we call that good philanthropy. Now, I have nothing against charity. Big fan of charitable gifts and grant making and all that. But the fact is, we have to really focus on this question of what % of our capital is actually advancing the value proposition that we seek to execute. And at the end of the day, the new golden rule really is not an equation that says that your potential is the size of your assets under management and how much your payout is, but rather an understanding that portfolio size does not in any way define the breadth of your vision, nor does it determine the tools that you're going to use to be able to pursue the future that you're trying to create. And the thing that I like about the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, which is a community that's very similar in terms of some of the challenges to what Hamilton's community is looking at, is that these are all done with program-related investments out of the foundation. And what that means is that the foundation actually gets credit for its 5% payout by virtue of taking these funds, taking greater risk, and structuring them as recoverable loans over time. But what they've been able to do is use those dollars to finance things as different as a full-service grocery, the construction of condominiums, the assembly of downtown acres to be structured and used in a different kind of multi-use development strategy, and actually have used PRI money into 4 venture capital funds that are providing risk capital for small businesses that are being developed in Kalamazoo. So with one instrument, this foundation is basically playing across a host of strategies. Do you think we could do more with what we have? Can we think differently about what it is that we do have? And can we structure our assets in ways to maximize the impact and long-term value, not simply for our family or our foundation, but for the broader set of stakeholders that we want to try to have an impact on their lives? I like the story of George Marshall, who's the guy who came up with the Marshall Plan. And people, like in retrospect, the Marshall Plan, how could you not be in favor of it, right? It makes a lot of sense. But at the time, you're coming out of the war, and the U.S. spent so much money already, and people were like, oh my God, enough with it, this and that. And so it was actually a very tough sell. And at one point, when he was testifying to Congress in the U.S. and was making the argument for why the U.S. should finance the Marshall Plan, George Marshall said, it's time that we steer our ships, not by the boats to our right or left, but by the stars above. And within philanthropy, we have the opportunity to connect the stars above into constellations and to really see that vision of where we're headed. And that's the opportunity that I think we have the chance to stand up and embrace. And that's really the power of engaged philanthropy with social impact, pursuing blended value in its fullest.